You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor, your host, and this is the first of a two-part interview with a woman who is having a wide-ranging career intersecting with service to society. Her family, in her early life, was stationed in several countries as her father served America as a foreign service officer. She is an artist, historian, and even worked in a wastewater treatment facility. Her husband is the elected governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and she is Frances Donnelly Wolf. We're going to talk with Frances today about her life of service, especially as it relates to her career and early life, and her philanthropy, which in some sense is shifting over time, although she's always had a focus on education. So we'll talk about that. And we're also going to cover her interest in making sure that charitable organizations are able to serve the needs of people as we work our way through this horrible pandemic. Well, it's great to have you, Frances.
Art, this is such a treat, and I'm really, really honored that you asked me to join you today. I'm excited. So thank you very, very much.
Well, it's really great to have you, Frances. Frances, you grew up living in different countries because your father was a foreign service minister. What was that like for you? How would you say that early part of your life influenced your philanthropy?
There was a lot going on, in our world as a whole. If I give you sort of in a chronological sequence of where we lived, there was, we first moved to Iran, and that's around the time, and this will show you my vintage, when the Shah was being placed in power. And after that, we moved to Bonn, Germany, when Bonn was the capital of Germany. And that was 10 years after the war, but there was still a lot of reconstruction, a rebuilding of the country. And then we moved to Paris, which was also wonderful. But during that time, that was at the time of the Algerian War of Independence that lasted from 54 to 62. And, there would be, people with rifles on the street, soldiers, so for protection facilities and buildings. Then we moved to Pakistan, to Karachi, when that was the capital. And that was a very calm time, at least in my child's world experience. And it was magical. It was magical. And then after that, we moved to England, where I finished high school and then went on to university, to one of the colleges of London University called SOAS. And that's where I majored in South Asian history, which was the history of India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. There are forces out there that, in a way, can threaten, can change. It might even change for the better sometimes. But there was a sense, being aware of who was in authority, what they wanted to do or not do, and having a sense that those decisions of someone else who I don't know, their decisions will have an impact on my life in some fashion. And you just sort of hunkered down and waited for it. I don't think that I could have been that specific at the time. I wasn't, that political, but, we were aware things as they were could change in an instant, and so you held on tightly. If it was working for you, you held on tightly to it. And it wasn't that we were nervous of change, because my life, we always, every few years, moved to another place. But it was part of the fabric of and the texture of how we, went about our lives.
Frances, how about the people of the different places you lived? Did you notice many similarities or significant departures from the daily lives of people in terms of how they supported each other or how they strove for a better society? Did you notice any differences between how maybe we view philanthropic service compared to other countries that you've lived? Did the people have this same orientation toward giving, for instance, that we had in the United States? How did government influence that, the way people behave potentially?
I don't know, in the big picture. I do know that, when we were in Germany, there were organizations that helped children who didn't have parents anymore, people who had been affected by the war and were making their way back. In France, I wasn't aware of that. We lived in a big city, and I went mainly to Catholic schools. So we were very much in the circle of Catholic organizations helping different neighborhoods with clothing, food, and shelter. And that was just part of being in the Catholic system. That's what we were supposed to do. In England, my mother volunteered for different organizations. They were English. And also, when we were in Germany, that was also a big threat of polio. And so she and others, my mother was a nurse, and so with others, a medical team put together and went out and inoculated children against, so they wouldn't contract it. So on a very small level, I can speak to that, but I wasn't aware at the time I didn't know what an American way of doing things and a French or a Pakistani way of doing things. What I was aware of is that this is what people did. So, there might have been different issues, different problems in different places, but the same was the impulse to get in there. And so my viewpoint is smaller scale, but even within that scale, the impulse was the same, to get out there and to make it better, to help.
What type of values did your parents instill upon you? I think about how it must have been growing up with people who were potentially larger than life in your world. Your father as a foreign service officer being asked to travel to different places around the world to represent our country. You must have grown up with a sense of importance and responsibility, even as a young person, although I would suspect your parents may have done as much as they could to give you a normal, upbringing.
One of the things is, and I am forever grateful, I'm not sure I would have been as adventurous. My parents, whatever country we went to, my parents sent us to the school of the country. We didn't go to an American school. So in France, I went to a French school, and same with all the other countries. And I think from the beginning, they impressed upon us that we were representatives of America, that people would judge our country by how we behave. And there would be, talk of, we don't want people to be disappointed in you or our country. So act accordingly. There was that sense. Family was very important, because we didn't have the rest of our family around. So our sort of nuclear family we were tight with each other, very, very tight. So, we were, exceptionally close. If I think about church was also very important, Catholic Church, and my parents were very involved, especially in Pakistan, with the church. And we were baptized, we had First Communion, we were confirmed. So, that since the church there, in these different places, there were slight differences in sort of, what the Mass was about. But ultimately, it was, in terms of loving your neighbor, no matter, which country we were in, that part was very, very important.
So let me ask you about the causes that matter to you most and whether those causes have evolved over time. When I look at your career, I can certainly say your interests in your careers have varied, throughout your life. Has that also had an effect on the causes that matter to you most, or have they remained relatively consistent?
I think sort of the subtext, as you would say, running through everything, is the idea of or the importance of education. When I graduated from college, SOAS, from London University, and I was not a stellar student. I was, I had a wonderful time at college. It was a very good time. But one of the things about a month or two after I graduated, my grandfather, who emigrated from Italy, wrote me a letter, and I still have it. And it's beautiful handwriting, very ornate, of a time when people were, taught cursive in the grandest fashion. And, he talked about me being at university, the first of his grandchildren, to have gone to university, and, what a good thing it was. But at the end, he said, by doing that, this act of you graduating, you have brought honor to the family. And that was another thing that was instilled in us, that it was almost a job. It was a responsibility for all of us, for my mother and her family, and she brought it to myself and to me and my siblings. This is a job that you have to do, and do it, really well to the best of your ability. But this is, serious work, and it is important work. And if I think of, the things that we've been involved with in different ways, that expression, you don't want to teach someone, to give someone something, but you want to teach them to fish. You want to teach them, how to do something, because that kind of thinking has influenced the kinds of things that we've been involved with. But chief among them are educational institutions. You and I know that, since we've both been on shared tenure on a college board, that it is transformative. It changes any person's life. And if we can get more people trained to think at a higher level, to perform at a higher level, and it's not always sort of academic scholar, but even in technical schools, to think in a mechanical way at a higher level, it affects all of the rest of us. It affects all of our lives, and the rest of the community around each individual, for all of us. And so those are the kinds of organizations and the causes that I get excited about and get excited about supporting.
On Franklin and Marshall's board, we certainly had a chance to understand the importance of college access. There's so many young people today who have the ability to perform well in school, but don't seem to have that access. How important do you think creating pathways are for young people? And what is the importance of education today in an environment with increasing costs and colleges that are having challenges with their budgets to even make it work? What do you see as the future of education, given that it's been such a great pathway for many people out of poverty into the middle class and so forth? What do you see going forward for these great institutions?
All of this is up in the air, but I think it is, of the utmost importance that we continue the very hard work to make the work of college, as accessible as we possibly can to students. I think also we need to let students know that they have the license to assume that this is their right, that they can, that, they go from first grade to second grade to third grade, from 12th grade to college, or 12th grade to technical school, that this is an automatic step for them. And in that automatic step, I would like to imagine that that step is as automatic as going from first to second grade. I don't know, how feasible it is, but that's something we need to work towards. I know at the college, we've been working with that, and not just some, more than a few of these students who are first generation students from both rural and urban settings who come are unbelievably magnificent scholars. They are there, they're motivated, And they're so talented. And I cannot imagine the community of the college that we're aware of not having these students there. The richness that they bring to the full community. And this is repeated over and over again. It's, colleges all over the country. I think those of us who have had that opportunity, our work isn't finished. We need to make sure that all these students have that right and can realize it.
That's well said. Frances, there's a lot of suffering going on in the world right now for a lot of reasons, but we can certainly say that the pandemic has shifted a lot of our attention away from things that we would normally be doing and supporting to really addressing how to best get out of the situation that we're in, how to best tamp down the effects of the virus. And I've been saying to a lot of people that the effects of this are not evenly distributed. There are some people who live in environments where they don't have to feel the effects so much. But then there are others for whom their living environment and maybe their poverty and so forth has a huge negative impact. Maybe they're frontline workers and so forth, and they have to engage with the virus more directly. What can we do? What should we be doing as a society right now? And maybe even how has that changed your thinking about, I would say in your case, you would probably call it obligation.
So those helping institutions that we've paid some attention to, all of us, one way or the other, that these institutions are incredibly important now. And I'm reminded, and it comes back to education. Food banks, for example, were in the past, they thought of themselves, and we have thought of them as stopgap measures, just to fill in, if you're going from one job to another and the paycheck hasn't come, or, those, or to help in the summertime when children don't have free breakfasts and lunches at school. Those kinds of gaps. What we're finding now is people are depending on them for being fed, just for their sustenance. And not only are people depending on them for, breakfast, lunch, and dinner meals, but there are many more people depending on it or using them. And so the demand has risen double time in this. When you look at of people who are we call food insecure, a lot of them are people who are, working a couple of jobs, who are going or had been going to putting together courses, college, community colleges, night classes. Their attempts to put together an education for themselves is being threatened because they're having to choose between finding, keeping the job they had or multiple jobs, to choose between food, to choose between rent, to choose between healthcare. And all of these things come and they all threaten the health of the social health of the family, the physical health of the family, but also their ability to move on, their ability to train themselves for something else, their ability to educate themselves for other jobs. It's all part of a full package. And when one is weakened, the whole thing is weakened. And that is something that both my husband and I are, very aware of. And we've been involved with soup kitchens here in York, helping out and supporting them. But we realize now that there's a larger pool of like organizations around the state. And, we're really working hard to make sure that not only are they receiving food from all sources, to engage farmers with excess food and restaurants or supermarkets, and then, to organize them into packages and to get them out to where the need is the greatest. Different counties are doing studies of their territory to see that they deliver food to the most, the neediest in the most efficient and effective way possible. And this is something we keep, we're really supporting. So we get it right to the people, working with Meals on Wheels, for example, to get to the elderly, to have churches open during the summer, and so-called camps to bring children in. Right now, we can't do that. So schools now are having, it's supported by the state, programs where they make lunches and the students can go and pick them up, or their parents can, being at a distance from each other, but it's just sort of pick up and go. So that we really, try hard to make sure that no child goes hungry, absolutely during the summer, but then during the rest, and especially on weekends, there are programs where children are given backpacks and filled with food on Fridays, so their families don't go hungry on the weekends. And it's only gotten worse. The situation's gotten worse, with COVID-19. And so we're having to step up even harder to, to fill in those gaps and to make sure that children and their families are safe in the full way. But I think, ultimately it's, it all leads back to education.
Education is the key. And, we have to think about how the pandemic is going to affect the education of young kids who are, in elementary and middle school and high school. Many of them don't have the necessary resources to do internet learning or Zoom learning, if we would call it that. And so they're stuck. It's too dangerous maybe to go to school, and they're not able to learn very well outside of school. And I just hope that the effects of this don't have this lingering challenge for our country and for these young people, because it's hard to catch up. It's so hard to catch up after you've been behind, or after you've gotten behind in your education. And so we'll have to see as a society, what becomes of this generation of young people. My sense is that it will probably call even more on our philanthropic organizations to find new pathways to serve people who find themselves, through no fault of their own, falling behind educationally and can't really make it in this world, in this knowledge-based world that we live in.
What's interesting, a while ago I visited a school. In my memory, it was, a classroom, middle school age. The principal said that a local company had provided every, let's say, 8th grader with an iPad to be used in school. And we said, oh my gosh, that's wonderful. And he said, yeah, but our school district has real serious budget issues. We can't afford to link up to the internet.
Wow.
We need to step back and start right basic. Can you afford to turn on the lights? Just start that way. There are other ways that are, children are being affected. In New York, Martin Library, and I was on the board of that for many, many years a while ago. And one of the programs they have are after-school programs, and children can go there after school and do their homework with their classmates around. But there are people there to help them, sort of tutors, library staff, who help them, which I think is, really, really helpful, because, they're doing it, there's a context, a real support system there for them. But right now, that doesn't exist. I don't know whether they're going to reopen that, once schools open, whether the library itself would, open first of all, and whether they'll, have that program. But that's a York County, Martin Library program. There are probably others, so many others multiplied many times over in all different communities. But that's another thing that's being threatened, another area of help for students. We need to, really work hard to get the incidence contracting this virus, way down. And then we can get back to normal. Then we can, get back to these programs. But right now, we're at a tipping point.
I think about all of the charitable organizations that you mentioned. They're probably hurting too, because a lot of the ways they went about raising funds, they're not able to do anymore. They're not able to access some of the things that they did in the past to raise money. And we want to continue to encourage people to support the organizations that matter to them so that these organizations can make it through this very difficult period and meet the needs that are going to be out there.
Absolutely. Organizations even like United Way, community foundations are very, very important in terms of to continue serving their populations.
This will conclude our first episode, and I am really excited about the next episode, which I hope everyone will listen to, where we will get to talk about your work as an artist and your interest in art serving society. We'll also get into your volunteerism in your local community of York and Central Pennsylvania, and also discuss your concerns for and advocacy for incarcerated women. So I hope everyone will tune in for our second interview with Frances Wolf. This is the Heart of Giving podcast. I'm Art Taylor, your host, and we're powered by bbbgive.org.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. Send your comments and ideas to nona@thusmarket.com. That's nona@thusmarket.com. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.